The sun never set on the Spanish Empire. It's a phrase that rings with history, echoing the power and influence of one of the largest empires the world has ever known. Spanning across continents with territories in the Americas, Europe, Asia, and Africa, the Spanish Empire left an indelible mark on global history. But how did it all start? How did a small kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula become a global superpower? And what caused its eventual decline? In this video, we're diving deep into the fascinating history of the Spanish Empire, tracing its rise, its golden age, and its eventual fall. From the age of exploration to the wars that shaped Europe and the Americas, the history of Spain's imperial past is nothing short of extraordinary. This is the true history of Spain that you didn't learn in school. The rise of Spain. To understand the Spanish Empire's meteoric rise, we first need to look at the foundation of Spain itself. The Spanish Empire didn't appear overnight. It was the result of centuries of political consolidation and military victories. In the late 15th century, the Kingdom of Spain was still divided into several independent states. The most powerful of these were Castile and Aragon. Their union began with the marriage of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon in 1469, an alliance that would change the course of history. Their reign marked the end of Muslim rule in Spain, with the fall of Granada in 1492, completing the Reconquista, the Christian reclamation of the Iberian Peninsula. The victory solidified their power, and their marriage effectively created the United Kingdom of Spain. But it wasn't just unification that marked the birth of the Spanish Empire. In the same year, Christopher Columbus set sail across the Atlantic Ocean, funded by the Catholic monarchs Isabella and Ferdinand. In doing so, he opened up a whole new world for Spain, the Americas. Columbus' discovery in 1492 would ignite one of the most ambitious exploration and colonization projects in history, the Age of Exploration and Conquest. The Spanish Empire's expansion began with the establishment of colonies in the Caribbean, Central America, and South America. Spain's early conquests were led by bold adventurers like Hernán Cortés, who famously overthrew the mighty Aztec Empire in 1521, and Francisco Pizarro, who toppled the Inca Empire in 1533. These conquests were driven by a thirst for wealth, primarily gold, and a desire to spread Christianity. The combination of superior military technology, the spread of European diseases like smallpox, and strategic alliances with native groups allowed the Spanish to quickly conquer vast territories. In the early 16th century, the Spanish Empire controlled a vast swath of the Americas. From the deserts of the southwest United States to the Andes Mountains, Spanish rule was felt from California to Argentina. Cities like Mexico City, Lima, and Havana became centers of trade, culture, and governance, where Spanish influence would dominate for centuries. One of the most important elements of the Spanish colonial system was the encomienda system, which granted Spanish settlers land and the labor of native peoples in return for promises of protection and conversion to Christianity. This system, however, often led to the exploitation and decimation of indigenous populations. The Spanish also made inroads into the Pacific. In 1565, Spanish explorers reached the Philippines, naming the archipelago after King Philip II of Spain. The Philippines became a key Spanish colony and a vital part of Spain's global trade network. The Habsburg dynasty, the Golden Age. The 16th century also marked the beginning of Spain's Golden Age, largely under the reign of the Habsburg monarchs. The Habsburg dynasty, starting with Charles I of Spain, also known as Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, would oversee a period of unprecedented expansion, wealth, and cultural flourishing. Charles I became king in 1516, and under his rule, the Spanish Empire reached its zenith. He inherited an empire that stretched across Europe, the Americas, and the Philippines. His reign saw Spain at its most powerful, dominating European politics and the world's oceans. Charles fought a series of wars against France, the Ottoman Empire, and the Protestant Reformation in Europe, and his battles in the New World secured Spain's control over vast lands. Charles's son, Philip II, took over the throne in 1556. His reign would be marked by both military victories and significant challenges. Philip II saw Spain's empire expand further, but he also faced the decline of Spanish power in Europe. Under Philip, Spain faced the Dutch Revolt, where the Protestant Netherlands fought for independence from Catholic Spain. The resulting 80 Years' War would drain Spanish resources and begin to destabilize the empire. Philip's greatest military failure, however, came in 1588 with the defeat of the Spanish Armada. In an attempt to invade England, Philip's fleet was crushed by the English navy, marking the beginning of the end for Spain's dominance over the seas. Despite these setbacks, the Spanish Empire remained a superpower throughout the 16th and early 17th centuries. Spain's influence was felt in art, literature, and science. This was the era of the Spanish Inquisition, as well as the rise of Spanish Baroque art, with figures like El Greco and Velázquez, and the literature of Miguel de Cervantes, whose Don Quixote remains one of the most important works in world literature. The decline of the Spanish Empire. However, the Spanish Empire began to show signs of strain in the 17th century. The Habsburg monarchy's constant involvement in European wars, particularly the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, drained Spain's resources. The economy suffered, and internal strife within the empire began to grow. One of the most damaging factors was the empire's reliance on gold and silver extracted from the Americas. While these riches fueled Spain's economy in the short term, the constant influx of precious metals caused inflation and weakened the Spanish economy in the long run. At the same time, Spain's military might begin to wane. The empire's vast territories were difficult to govern, and the burden of defending them stretched Spain's resources thin. The Spanish military was no longer the invincible force it once was, and this left Spain vulnerable to attacks from other European powers. By the late 17th century, Spain's dominance was challenged by the rise of France, England, and the Dutch Republic, all of whom sought to expand their own empires at Spain's expense. The War of Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714, marked a turning point for Spain. The war was fought over who would succeed to the Spanish throne after the death of the childless Charles II. The conflict involved Spain, France, and various European coalitions. In the end, the war led to the Treaty of Utrecht, which significantly reduced Spain's territories. The Spanish Netherlands, Naples, Milan, and Gibraltar were ceded to other European powers, diminishing Spain's once mighty global presence. The Bourbon dynasty and further decline. In 1700, the Bourbon dynasty took over the Spanish throne when Philip V, a grandson of King Louis XIV of France, ascended the throne. The Bourbons made some efforts to reform Spain's institutions and modernize the empire, but by then the empire was already in a state of decline. The 18th century saw Spain's continued decline in both economic and military terms. Spain lost most of its European territories, and by the early 19th century, the independence movements in the Americas began to gain momentum. The Napoleonic Wars were particularly devastating for Spain. In 1708, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Spain and installed his brother, Joseph Bonaparte, as king. The invasion triggered the Peninsular War, a brutal conflict in which Spanish guerrillas, supported by British forces, fought to expel the French. The war severely weakened Spain, and in the aftermath, many of Spain's Latin American colonies began to declare independence. By the 1820s, Spain had lost most of its empire, including territories like Mexico, Argentina, and Peru. The final years, the end of the Spanish Empire, the loss of the American colonies in the 19th century marked the final collapse of the Spanish Empire. Spain, now reduced to a small European kingdom, struggled to modernize and rebuild its economy. The empire's golden age, which had lasted for over 3 centuries, had come to an end. In the 20th century, Spain was embroiled in political turmoil, leading to the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1939, and the eventual rise of Francisco Franco's dictatorship. Spain remained neutral during World War II and only began to regain its international standing after Franco's death in 1975. Today, Spain is a modern, democratic nation, but its once grand empire continues to leave an indelible legacy across the world. The cultural, architectural, and linguistic influences of the Spanish Empire are still felt in former colonies, especially in Latin America. The story of the Spanish Empire is one of grandeur and tragedy, triumph and decline. It is a story of exploration, conquest, and cultural exchange, but also of exploitation and loss. From its rise as a global superpower to its eventual collapse, the history of the Spanish Empire is a testament to the complexity of imperial ambition. The legacy of Spain's empire lives on today, in the language spoken by hundreds of millions of people and the cultural ties that bind nations across continents. The story of the Spanish Empire is not just one of the past, but also a reflection of how history continues to shape our world. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of the Spanish Empire, the next video takes us back in time to explore the ancient history of the Japanese Empire. Don't forget to like and subscribe.